So that's actually one of the lochs we drove by in Scotland a few years ago when we were visiting there. Just Highlands of Scotland are amazingly beautiful, and yeah. So every once in a while I go and find a picture to share. This last week, one of the things that's been in the news is big cheating scandal. Had a funny sign planned for this week, but the Astros stole it. Yeah, in case you hadn't noticed, there's a huge scandal that's rocked Major League Baseball. The Houston Astros were using, and one of the major things they use are people banging on trash bins. Hence the Houston Astros introducing their coaching staff. And that's what they meant by stealing signs. The catcher gives signs to the pitcher, and then they were using technology to zoom in on what the catcher was doing and then relaying it via technology to the dugouts. And they found really strong evidence that it was being done. It was done with the knowledge of the manager, who claims he knew about it, but he just didn't stop it. And the guy who was the coach, who specifically was responsible for it, then became manager of the Boston Red Sox, and they are under close investigation, almost certainly guilty of the same things in the 2018 World Series and playoffs. And yeah, did it really make a difference? Well, this is interesting. From the 2017 World Series, during the course of that World Series, Altuve, one of the leading hitters on the Astros, his average at home was a .472, and his average away from home was a 143. Correa, another one of their big hitters, at home his average was 371, and away was 211. Now, a little difference between home and away is understandable, particularly in the case of the Colorado Rockies, where their home field has that high altitude and therefore sort of inflates batting averages. But this kind of a difference? Brian McCann, a 300 average at home and a .037 average away. Yeah. But something that I find really troubling is the fact that the Astros and Red Sox, the owner, the managers, the coaches, the players, have yet to actually apologize for cheating. They're really sorry they got caught. But there does not appear to be any kind of real understanding that what they did was simply wrong. What they did was sinful. Because that's what cheating is. It's dishonesty and it's sin. But I'm afraid that it's not just in places like that we see the dishonesty. In the academic world, over 60% of college students admit to cheating in order to try and get a better grade. In high school, it's over 75% of students who say they do it. And 85% believe, so even some of those who don't do it, or at least haven't admitted to doing it, say, well, it is a good strategy, it is a good way to improve your grade. The recent college admission scandal, where people were paying hundreds of thousands, in some cases millions of dollars, to get their children admitted to a prestigious college, university. I mean, it's the same underlying principle. Here's what I want, And I'm going to make sure I get it, whether it is done ethically or not. There was a high school biology teacher in Kansas who discovered that 25%, one-fourth of her students had cheated on a major project in her biology class, and she flunked the students. Now, had that been my child, what happened getting an F in the biology class would have been the least of their troubles. But what actually happened in Kansas, and it's not just Kansas, I think this is unfortunately a nationwide issue. The parents were outraged that the teacher would do that to their child. And they went to the school board, and ultimately the school board issued a directive that the teacher was to change the grade of the students. So what was the lesson those students learned? How about in the business world? What happened with VW and their diesel engines? They wanted to claim they had an affordable but well-functioning diesel engine. And the problem had always been that with diesel engines, you could get better mileage and all of that, but you lost the zoom and the acceleration. VW claimed to have fixed it without excess emissions. But the way they got there was with cheating. They figured out a way to fool the emissions tests. You know, how about the Wells Fargo scandal? All kinds of accounts open in the names of people that hadn't been done. And the truth is, when you look at it, in the case of Wells Fargo, the people actually responsible for it pretty much got off scot-free. The people that got hammered for it were the people who had opened the accounts fraudulently, and they should have been. However, the reason they did was because essentially they were told to. The guys at the top, and ultimately the board is responsible for that, had set out such ridiculous kinds of goals and targets for new accounts that there was no way to get there without cheating. How about the Boeing 737 MAX? Where the pressure was to come up with this new system that they could sell and all of that, and that led to shortcuts being made and led to 2 plane crashes and over 300 people who died. But all going back to essentially the same issue. People cutting corners, people cheating to get to a particular goal. That somehow the end justifies the means. That as long as you get there, it's okay, it doesn't matter what you do. Yeah, in politics, I mean, when was the last time you saw a political ad that you could actually believe? The lies and distortions of the truth just seems to be part and parcel of politics these days. Relationships. Found this kind of startling. They reckon that in a survey they had found that over 60% of the men and over 50% of the women admitted to having extramarital affairs. At what was it? Ashley Madison website that was discovered a few years ago. I remember reading about it in the press that they had been hacked and their data They'd been kind of blackmailed over their data, as I recall, and they were supposed to pay out money, which they didn't do, and then as a result, a bunch of information was released about that actually showed a number of people, because the whole business model of Ashley Madison was, we will arrange discrete dates for you. It was for married people who were looking to hook up with somebody. Wow. Wow. You know what? Every once in a while in an email account that we have that we use for business purposes, Carol and I, an email will show up from Ashley Madison. They're still in business. I figured that would put them out of business. No. Unfortunately, there's still a market for it. So, what's the big deal? In one sense, I guess, what difference does it make who wins the World Series? Of course, if you're an LA Dodgers fan, or if, see, who was it? They lost 2 World Series to teams that cheated. Yeah. One of the reasons it's a big deal is because there's a massive cost to society. I found this an interesting statistic. Retail stores. The cost to retail stores of shoplifting and employee theft, over $50 billion per year. And you know what? As a result of that, what do businesses do? They have to raise their prices to cover loss through shoplifting, and employee theft is one of the costs of doing business. So that has to be factored into their pricing. So guess what? Guess who pays? You and me. Every member of the society pays for that dishonesty and cheating. Every single one of us. What was the cost of the Great Recession of 2007 to 2009? I've read estimates of anything from $2 to $6 or $7 trillion to the U.S. and world economy. How many people lost their homes as a result of that? How many people lost their incomes as a result of that? How many lives have been ruined because of that? What cost? And it goes down to greed. It goes down to people trying to cheat. And yet, no one's ever been held accountable for it. The truth is, cheating and dishonesty by anybody, in truth, extracts a cost on everybody. It's a big deal because actually, truth, dishonesty, cheating destroys relationships. When people ask what's the most important quality in a friend, absolutely above and beyond anything else, is trustworthiness. I got to know I can trust that person. So what happens when you find out you can't? But of course, the most important reason, the real reason it really is a big deal, is because this is a direct violation of God's very nature. Paul in 2 Corinthians chapter 1 and verse 18 says, God is faithful. His promises are not yes and no. What God says you can count on. What God says is what he means. What God says is true. Because as the writer of Hebrews tells us in Hebrews 6 and verse 18, it is impossible for God to lie. It just isn't in his nature. It's not the way he is. He cannot lie. And when we look at the Ten Commandments in Exodus chapter 20, and you look at verses 15 through 17, you read the last three commandments. Thou shalt not bear false witness. Thou shalt not steal. Number 8. Thou shalt not bear false witness. Number 9. Thou shalt not covet. Number 10. And I do believe the Ten Commandments truly do reflect the fundamental nature of God, which is why everything except number 4, which is the Sabbath day, is repeated in the New Testament. And number 4, even that principle that there needs to be some kind of a balance, that your life should not be consumed by making money and working, is repeated in the New Testament. That's why cheating, dishonesty, really is a big deal. It really does matter to God. I mean, after all, it cost Jesus his life. In Isaiah 53 and verses 4 and 5, the writer, the prophet speaking from God, has these words to say about Jesus and about his life on earth. He says, surely he took up our infirmities and carried our sorrows. Yet we considered him stricken by God, smitten by him, and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was upon him, and by his wounds we are healed. Jesus died because we sinned. Jesus died because people cheated and lied. Yeah, ultimately, it's really a big thing because it's sinful. That's why it matters. So why? Why does it seem to be so prevalent in our world? And as I was thinking about this, it struck me from a very early age, there's a strong emphasis on winning. You know, I want my child to be reading before anybody else is. I want my child to be walking before other children do. Instead of recognizing it, it's simply a matter of development and everybody's different. But we got to win because we need to have the bragging rights. I mean, that just kind of seems to be the norm. But you know, so often we're working towards the wrong goal. Paul in 2 Timothy chapter 4 and verses 6 through 8 speaks of the goal of his life in these words, where he says, I am already being poured out like a drink offering, and the time has come for my departure. I've fought the good fight. I've finished the race. I've kept the faith. Now there is in store for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award to me on that day, and not only to me, but also to all who have longed for his appearing. So that's the issue here, is that the goal should be that life of righteousness and faith, not making lots of money, not getting titles, not achieving fame, but living a life of faithfulness and service. That's what actually is important. But our focus is in the wrong place. You know, one of the sort of things that I saw this week was somebody was tweeting out that the problem, that the idea everybody gets a trophy has been kind of poo-hooed, as this is ridiculous. Everybody gets a trophy. No, 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 it should just be those who win. Well, the problem is not, the issue is that everybody gets a trophy had exactly the right idea, that what needs to be rewarded, what needs to be put forward as the real goal is the engagement, the hard work, and and competing, actually being in the game. That's what should be rewarded. Our problem is we still think there has to be a trophy. If there isn't a trophy, then you're not winning. No. You win by being in the game. You win by doing the hard work. And that's the message that needs to get out to our whole society. That's what winning is really about, living a life of faith and service. That's what matters. And we need to rethink, really, the incentives we provide people. If we don't, when we put schools in a position where their whole effectiveness is measured by test scores, we shouldn't be surprised that people end up cheating on tests. You're almost guaranteeing that's going to be the case. When these corporations set up totally unreasonable goals, such as happened with VW and with Boeing and with Wells Fargo, and in other cases, cheating was almost inevitable. And then it seems like there's always we only really seem to care about it when it's the other person that does it. I mean, I truly have been struck by the fact that the Astros and Red Sox fans, from what comes out on social media, seems to be their only concern is, well, they're sure other teams were doing it too. I mean, in a sense, so what? So let's hope those other teams get caught too. Because other people did it doesn't make it okay. You know, I am struck by the contrast. I didn't hear a lot of Democrats complaining about the Clinton email scandal. In fact, they were outraged that the FBI was investigating it and actually announced they were investigating it during the 2016 campaign. Similarly, I don't hear a lot of Republicans outraged over the Russian meddling in our election in 2016. And yet both of them actually have an impact on our national security and well-being as a nation. We should be equally outraged by both. It just seems to be, well, you know, those other people did it. That's terrible, but if my guy does it, it's okay. Truth is, God is no respecter of persons. That's what Peter found out. Remember Acts chapter 10 and verse 34 when he was called to the house of Cornelius, a Gentile? And God let him know, that's okay. I am accepting the Gentiles on the same basis as I am the Jews, on the basis of their faith in Christ. And Peter said, I now realize God is no respecter of persons. It doesn't matter if you're a Jew or a Gentile, a Greek or a barbarian, it doesn't matter. I'm holding you to the same standard. And indeed, in Romans 3, verses 9 through 18, Paul makes a very strong statement that Jew and Gentile, everyone, is accountable to God on the same basis. What about us? Well, the truth is you and I are called to be salt and light. We're supposed to be having an influence on our world. So we need to keep our lives truly focused on eternal life. The winning that ought to concern us, the crown, the trophy that really matters is the one that is eternal. And that comes through a life of faith and of service. We need to be equally outraged by cheating and dishonesty, no matter who does it. You know, I was been listening to a book about the history of the Troubles in Northern Ireland that lasted from 1969 to 1997 or something like that. And he talked about, the author talks about how difficult it is to get anybody to really actually have a meaningful conversation about the atrocities that happened. If you're talking to a Catholic, they don't want to hear about what the IRA did. And if you mention something the IRA did, their immediate response is, yeah, but what about? And they mention something the Protestants did. And if you're talking to a Protestant, if you mention something they did, the immediate response is, well, what about something the IRA did? Well, the end result is you get deeply divided communities because all we can do is, instead of recognizing wrong wherever it happens and whoever does it, instead we excuse the one because what about what that other person did? If it's wrong, it's wrong. If it's sin, it's sin. It doesn't matter who's responsible. It doesn't matter who did it. It doesn't matter what tribe they belong to. It doesn't matter the color of their skin, their language, or anything else. Sin is sin. And we really need to be praying for our nation to have a real transformation, to recognize the value of and the importance of integrity. Cheating, dishonesty is sinful. The book of Proverbs, when it speaks about the things God hates, there's 7 things that are listed, and about 4 of the 7 actually relate to being honest or failing to be honest. But something God hates, you reckon we should hate it too? And then when you look in Psalm 15, the psalm that speaks of the qualities of one who can come to God, again, about half of them have to do with being honest. Yeah, it matters. It's important. We need to value it in our own lives, and we need to value it in our society. If you're not a child of God, we invite you to come out together. We stand and sing.
You live for Jesus and be always pure and good.